So Israel and the United Arab Emirates have announced that they're going to normalize ties. This story, of course, big news. Everyone's talking about it, a lot of outrage over it, and a lot of people confused on different issues surrounding this whole thing, how it was brokered. The signing of an agreement, a peace agreement as they're calling it, is going to be in the coming weeks. We know that. And of course, there's a number of different ways that different parties have played this. The UAE has said, look, we stepped in. This is to appease, whoever actually believes in what they say. That we stopped annexation. The Israelis, this is a great day for them. We're breaking through, with making peace with the Arabs and all the rest of it. They're accepting us, all of this sort of stuff. And then Trump, of course, I brokered a peace deal in the Middle East. I brokered a great peace deal in the Middle East. And talking about how hostile it is. There was no hostility between the UAE and Israel. They had a long relationship, and it's only grown over the past few years. And their cooperation has been huge. In Yemen, in Libya, in Palestine, all over. They've been cooperating, sharing intelligence, all sorts of different things. And so it's not controversial, really. And they weren't really neck and neck. But what this is, it's a symbolic move. It's a bit of a symbolic slap in the face of the Palestinians. Also, what it does is it sort of signals the complete end of the Arab Peace Initiative, this idea of land for peace, and the two-state solution in general, as endorsed by, these powers in the Arab world. What it may also do is pave the way for countries like perhaps Saudi Arabia, but more likely the likes of Bahrain and Oman, to also do the same thing. And it also might serve as something where they can sort of test the waters as to, how far can we go with this normalization stuff, and whether it will backfire in any way. And of course, we've heard from Erdogan in Turkey that they're going to cancel relationships, withdraw ambassador from the UAE and all the rest of this. So we'll see how that all goes. But the important things when we're looking at this to know is that this is really just Donald Trump trying to get a win out of nothing. It's not really a big thing. Also, this is a very integral part of it because the UAE in of themselves, they're not, the most important factor of this. Really, the most important factor is Israel. And so Israel, of course, this deal, Donald Trump stated it, and the White House was talking about it. The UAE were talking about stopping the annexation of the West Bank. Now, Netanyahu then went and delivered a speech a few hours later after Trump's announcement and the statement that he put out on Twitter. And Netanyahu said, look, we're not abandoning annexation. It's going to be postponed. This is, again, it's not really controversial. Netanyahu had to play to his base. He's, of course, got this base of right-wing fanatics, settlers, and all the rest of this. And the settler movement, of course, is a big, very powerful bloc. And they are extremely angry that the annexation is not happening. And even if annexation did happen, the settlers and many who support Netanyahu don't think that just annexing the areas Netanyahu was talking about, the Jordan Valley, Northern Dead Sea area, much of Area C, the settlements, etc., that this was far enough. They thought that everything has to be taken and there is no chance for any Palestinian areas governed by what could be called a Palestinian state. They're against the Trump so-called deal of the century. Now, Netanyahu knew that he couldn't go ahead and just straight up annex all of that land. And one of the reasons for that is because there's a very big possibility that Joe Biden may win the election. If that happens, the reaction from within the United States from the Democrats was they were talking about conditioning aid to Israel and all different things. And there was a number of responses which were coming throughout the world. From Europe, the strongest worded threats against Israel if they went ahead with annexing the West Bank. Now, how much that factored into it? Maybe it did. Perhaps it did. But I think Netanyahu, as a strategist, knows that if he took the whole entire land, then if the Democrats came in, there's nothing for them to work with. If Trump is gone, there's nothing for the future administrations to work with, and they can't go back to this idea of two-state solution. So I believe he wants to keep that window open. And what he wanted to do from the very start was to annex the settlements. Now, if he annexes the settlements, he can argue that he's only annexed, this is what they do because they spin numbers, that he only annexed 5% of the West Bank. Really, it's about 10%. Of course, East Jerusalem is already annexed. You've got all of the land behind the wall, which constitutes about 12% of Palestinian land. And already, anyway, it's, a de facto annexation in the West Bank. It's not a de jure annexation, but it's a de facto annexation inside of the West Bank. So for him postponing this and also signing this agreement as well with the UAE, what he can do is he can give himself some breathing space. He can talk about how, look, the Arabs have came to us and now they're making peace with us, and so we had to push back, and then he'll accuse his political rivals of this and that, and he's got the corruption trials ongoing and the protesters and all the rest of it, and Netanyahu, as a politician, is very smart and he knows how to spin these things. And so I believe in the end what he will do is annex the settlements, and the reason why I say he will annex the settlements, maybe a little bit more land, I'm not sure. But the reason why I'm saying that I believe he'll just annex the settlements, and I thought this basically from the very start, and, I was debating whether he'd take more land in my own mind. But basically what we can see is if he takes those settlements, then he can argue, look, there's still a two-state solution, which is viable. We can still have negotiations because, in the past, we always said, the Israeli side always said we wanted the settlements and we'd have mutual land swaps and all the stuff like this. So they can still play it off in that way. So when we're looking at this issue of the peace agreement, as it's being called, and of course it's not going to create any peace, it's just basically the United Arab Emirates co-signing all of the Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people, showing that they are only about money and they're only an imperial invention. They're not a real nation, really. That's independent and has their own independent policies in terms of like a national drive. These are just old dictators. These sort of countries, they're or an emirate is they're controlled by dictators who don't represent the sentiment of their people. And of course, in the case of the UAE, it's not really anything that's significant, in the Arab world. In terms of population-wise, it's not going to change the opinion of anyone else, especially in the Levant and Iraq, etc. And it might just further push over Muslim public opinion in the Sunni world over to really the Brotherhood side, the Ikhwan side, and which of course is based in Turkey and Qatar, and elsewhere where the Muslim Brotherhood is ruling, and really Turkey's become the center of Sunni Islam and not Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia seems to be losing this. And so that's what I see it being at the moment. I don't see this really as something historic. I don't see this as something that's really going to change much on the ground. It's going to change nothing, quite literally nothing it's going to change. They could be doing this for a number of reasons because of them planning for an attack as well, to maneuver themselves properly. It could be to do with the United States and how it's maneuvering itself inside of the Middle East. That could have something to do with it. There could be deals struck under the table that we don't know about. But really, it's political posturing by the Trump administration. Netanyahu can say it's a win on his part and all the rest of this, as if they really didn't have these ties already. It's the end of the two-state solution. I mean, when you haven't even got the Arab regimes on the side of, supporting a two-state solution, then, it's nothing. And Netanyahu eventually, I believe he will go ahead with taking the settlements to appease his base. Then he'll come up with all these excuses. If he has a war, perhaps with Gaza, he can use as an excuse. Maybe he's going to do something with Lebanon, etc. He'll blame all these external factors, whatever he can pull in, his political rivals, the fact that he's got all of these peace agreements that he's signed and all the rest of it. And he'll talk about all of the things he's done in order to basically justify the fact that he hasn't taken all of the land which he said he would take in his election campaign. And so that's what I see this whole situation as being. I don't see this as something which is, a major game changer in the Middle East. It's really not. It's just a continuation of the trends that we've been seeing in the past few years. And with Trump in the White House, basically he's just cemented the idea that the two-state solution is just completely dead. It's, you can just throw it away in the dustbin now. You can forget about it. But of course, this really is, in turn, it's actually probably going to help the idea of a two-state solution in the future if Joe Biden wins. Just ridiculous posturing, I believe, and I don't think it's going to have too much of a historic effect. It's just basically continuing what we've seen, and it's a major slap in the face to the Palestinians, and it shows that the UAE have no interest in the Palestinian cause, and neither do Saudi Arabia or Oman or Bahrain.